Welcome to the Soul Grit Podcast. I'm Ann Taylor McNeese, and I'm a licensed marriage and family therapist. I also love Jesus, and I'm passionate about all things gospel and therapy. I created Soul Grit to be at the intersection of mental health and Christian faith. Christ followers need a place to ask questions and get answers about mental health. Join me as we dive into real stories and real questions from people who want to honor God with their hearts, souls, and minds. Hi, welcome back to the Soul Grit Podcast. This is Ann. I'm here today with Todd Turner, who's an author and a podcaster, and is going to talk to us today a little bit about divorce in the Christian context. So, hi, Todd.
Thanks for having me. I'm so glad to be here.
Yeah, I'm really looking forward to this conversation for a couple of reasons. One, because we all know somebody in our lives that have gotten divorced. And, you know, if you look around from side to side at church, you're probably looking at somebody who's gone through it, will go through it, has had it in their family. And yet, as a church, we're not doing a real great job of caring for people through that.
That's an understatement. Yeah, isn't it funny? Like statistically, I think we are about the same as, non-Christians as
Right.
far as divorce rates for first marriages and second marriage. It's clearly an epidemic in our country and our churches, but yet we really don't talk about it other than every once in a while you'll have a pastor give a sermon on marriage
Yep.
and divorce. And it's like, well, here's what God
Don't
says.
get divorced.
Yeah, don't do it. And, God wants you to stay married forever. It's like, okay. If you don't mind, I'm going to give you an analogy I use all the time on this problem. Getting divorced is trauma. It's like being in a car wreck and you go to church and you're limping and you're bloody. And the church is like, hey, welcome to church. Like, you want to work in our children's ministry today? And you're like, I just had a car wreck. And then the pastor gets up and spends his whole sermon telling you how cars aren't supposed to be wrecked. God made them not to be a wreck. You're like, okay, but I had a wreck.
Yeah.
And there's millions of Christians who their churches are not, to your point, ministering because they just, well, our pastor says don't do it. It's a sin. And then we're like, well, where's the recovery road?
Right.
Where's the empathy and the passion to care for people that are in serious pain and turmoil? And I just didn't find it was there.
Yeah. And neither of us are here to tear down churches or to say you're doing it wrong or anything like that.
But some do it wonderfully.
Yeah, but we do want to make sure that we just call attention to the fact that if you are going through a divorce or somebody that you know is, or you've recently been through it, we understand that you might not have found a soft landing spot there. And that makes it doubly hard.
No, that's exactly right. I named my podcast title when I talk about churches and divorce. I named it "Church When the Solution Hurts."
Yeah.
And it's the answer sometimes frequently, well, Jesus. We sometimes associate that with church, but Jesus loves the church, but the church is full of people, and so therefore we have flaws. And so sometimes the people in the church aren't as attentive. And I do draw this distinction between Jesus is always the answer. Not sure church always is. For some of our listeners today did not find that, or in the moment, even now, of not finding it, and they have to seek elsewhere.
Yeah. And I have to say, like, I've worked with people who have come to me in counseling and have said, I want to get a divorce. This is what I want. I think my life is going to be better. I think that my kids will understand that I just need to be happy. Like I've heard some things, but for the most part, everybody that I know that has gone through a divorce didn't want it. It wasn't the thing that they, stood up at their wedding day and said, let's do a few years and then we'll dissolve all of this. Or, it would be fine if I had the economic burden of dividing all of our finances. Like nobody has that in mind, especially if you are a Christian. You're not thinking that this is going to happen at some point. And so for us as Christians to say, yeah, well, you really kind of screwed that up. You were sinful and you shouldn't have gotten a divorce. That's like, yeah, it's just poking people in the wound, right?
boy, you are 100% right on that. And with especially Christians, I think we have it doubly bad. And that is divorce, to your point, is already traumatic. No one wants it. It's because now some people do have a challenge approach of like, hey, God, I deserve to be happy. God wants me happy. Sometimes that's just they're speaking out of their wounds or whatever. It's not, they don't want it. They're just justifying it in their head or whatever. Nobody really wants it. But as Christians, we made a promise to God,
Hmm.
till death do us part. Not one of us walked. I mean, maybe somebody did, but 99% of us walked down the aisle. We meant what we said when we said "I do,"
Hmm.
and we have all these goals of here's what my life's going to look like, and I love my spouse, and maybe you're growing a family. You, most of us didn't want to get divorced. We really didn't. So we feel like we're disappointing God. We're definitely crushing all our dreams.
Hmm.
And then we're also dealing with whatever caused the divorce
Yeah.
laying on top of us and that guilt.
Hmm.
And so when we're in one of the worst time of our lives, where do you turn? And when you say go to the church, and once again, I'll be repetitive here. I just don't think most churches have a lot of empathy. And I also believe that becomes because the pastors haven't walked the road.
Hmm.
Thank goodness, but their
Hmm.
qualification, a husband and one wife, and they're married and they haven't gone through it. And when you haven't gone through something, you're a little naive to the details.
Yeah.
And I just don't think they're sensitive. And then of course people in the church follow the pastor's, you know, his personality, his teachings
Hmm.
make their way into the hallways. They
Yep.
make their way into the Sunday schools and the small groups.
Hmm.
And so I think everybody stays a little tight-lipped of just
Hmm.
marriage good, divorce bad,
Hmm.
move on,
Hmm. Yeah.
to the detriment of those who are in pain.
Yeah. Yeah. Have you seen churches that are doing it well?
I am paying way more attention now than I ever have,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Um, I would say there are I live in Dallas
Hmm.
area, and so there's a church, you know, you can hit a golf ball and hit, church to church to church if you want.
Yep.
They're everywhere. But I would say a good handful are intentional about reaching out to that people group.
Mm.
Okay. So that's good, meaning they realize this is a special people group that needs attention and they actually reach out not only to their own flock, but even to the community.
Yeah.
I will say, personally, for me, most of those I don't think are doing the job that would work for me because it's still very, here's your book.
Hmm.
It's very Christianese. If
Yeah.
it's a video series, it's very Christianese. It's
Hmm.
just, you know, I'm a real and raw Christian,
Mm.
meaning that my best friends are pastors, and quite frankly, we cuss a little, and it's because we're real and raw. We talk truth, not the shiny, and a lot of the door stuff is very shiny.
Hmm.
A bad example of Christianese is like, well, I'm worried about whatever. Oh, well, the Bible says don't worry. Here's the
Hmm.
verse. See,
Hmm.
it says don't worry. So why are you worrying, honey? You should be
Just
worrying.
don't.
Just don't. It's
Yeah.
like I'm like I want to come in saying I'm having a blankety blank day,
Hmm.
and I want them to say, man, I feel you. I
Yeah.
feel you.
Yeah.
What can I do to help you today? Like I don't need to preach to you. I mean, like here's some steps I used. By the way, there's not going to have a Bible verse in it. It's just
Hmm.
practical.
Mm.
It's just practical. And I'll go a little further. I'm a big believer that the Bible is true. Like I'm very conservative in that area. The Bible is true, but not all truth is in the Bible.
Hmm.
All truth is God's truth, but not all truth. He left a lot out.
Mm.
And so like medicine, he left it out, but yet we use science and experimentation and we learn things. Well, same with counseling and psychology. Like there's a lot of great stuff out there that's not in the Bible. And
Hmm.
I think church's answer is just like, well, come to church and let's talk Bible stuff and you'll just heal yourself right on out of that problem you have. It's like, not good enough.
Yeah. So
You
are
would
you
know
saying,
better than me.
yeah, well, we've talked about that before in this podcast, but are you saying like for you, let me just clarify, you don't want a shiny curriculum that gives you a Bible verse and tells you just be better. You want a place where you can go and be raw use the language you need to use. You know, be around people who can say, "Yeah, man, that really stinks."
Yeah. Yeah. I do. Now I've only done this in the podcast and I do it with my friends, but
Mhm.
it's talking like my Unyoked podcast. What I've identified with my episodes are what I call like the 17 stages. Like these are the milestones you're going to go through. So one may be dating and one to get into counseling, but we literally have one on sex.
Mhm.
I was like, your church is never going to talk about
Gonna
that.
talk about it.
But we do because I'm like, well, I even told one of my pastor friends, I go, do you think all divorced people grab their Bible at 7 p.m. and read it till they're tired and fall asleep? Like, is that what y'all think we do? We're out on dates. We're we're in temptations you guys hadn't even thought about. Well,
Mhm.
instead of not talking about it, let's talk about it. Like,
Yeah.
let's talk about it. I'm not telling you it's. I don't spend my time like, well, here's the Bible. It says this or this. I mean, sometimes I bring that stuff up. I just want to talk about it.
Mhm.
Here's why people make these decisions. Here's why people make these decisions. Here's how you're probably feeling about that. Some of
Mhm.
you are justifying this way, and you might want to think about that. Some of you are
Mhm.
justifying it this way. Well, let me challenge that. I just
Mhm.
want to move the needle and call a spade a spade. And
Mhm.
honestly, I'm sure there's plenty of people doing great things, but I never found this podcast, which is why I created it.
Yeah.
And so I'm even writing books and I'm going to try to make them real and raw. Like it's not, if you think I'm not saying the solution isn't the Bible. I think the Bible is sufficient
Mhm.
for any problem if you're looking high level. But
Mhm.
in the weeds of it, there's not every situation has a Bible verse.
Yeah.
And so why not just sit and well, one, mourn well. I say all the time, Job's friends were great when they started out until they opened their mouth.
Until they
Uh,
weren't.
yeah, but they were just there to sit
Yeah.
and mourn with
Yeah.
them. What a great friend.
Yeah.
And then when somebody just says, you know, man, I'm feeling this. Okay, yeah, yeah. Well, you know what? I went through that. I felt that too. And you know, not the Bible says don't feel that way. Yep, nope, don't do that. Well, how does that help anybody?
Well, that's actually bringing me to another question I wanted to ask you is like, as friends, like I'm not currently going through divorce and hoping never to through divorce, but I do have friends that are. So, how can I be a good friend to somebody who's going through that?
A great question. Um, I'm going to answer it a little bit long way, but we have a podcast. We're allowed to do that, right?
Okay.
One of the straws that broke the camel's back for me to create the podcast. I was contemplating it, but I
Mm,
was listening to a Christian podcast, and it was, to your point, it was a pastor and maybe the women's minister at their church, is what I'm assuming. They weren't a husband and wife, but they were associated with the church and they had a podcast.
okay.
And they were probably just like you, like, how can we help divorced people? Well, they
Hmm.
were talking, and when they were talking, I realized, oh, y'all don't get it. You're
Mm,
not speaking our language. And here's what they said. The lady goes, you know, when I talk to women who are divorced, they frequently just want to talk to me about their divorce. And I don't care what the reason is. I love them. Like, why would I care? It doesn't matter. I love you. And the
mm.
pastor goes, yeah, they do that. Sometimes you just got to tolerate it and whatever. And I'm thinking, you guys, like, if they want to talk about the divorce, let them talk.
Mm.
Matter of fact, listen,
Yeah.
empathize.
Yeah.
You know, just your best friend probably has just been ripped out of your life. Your
Hmm.
whole world's turned upside down. You're
Hmm.
gonna make some stupid mistakes.
Mm.
You're gonna make some financial mistakes. You're gonna make some dating mistakes. You're gonna make parenting mistakes. You don't need somebody rolling their eyes when you talk or just like patting you on the head like
They're
I feel
there.
sorry for you. Or worse, give Christianese.
Hmm.
Oh, God's got something better for you. You know, you're gonna be hard. Steve was always a jerk, but those are all the wrong things to say.
Hmm.
It's just sit and walk through one of life's messes with somebody well. When they want you to coach, coach. If they
Mm.
don't ask, don't.
Yeah.
Just say, I'm here, because their friend group just got ripped out from under them.
Yeah.
Their life divorce is way more of a tsunami effect in a life than I ever assumed.
Mm,
Before I just thought, oh, somebody screwed up. The other person's going to leave. They're going to be better off. And will forgive them both, but it's probably better for them to move on. And then they'll both live happily ever after, or they won't. I don't know.
mm,
And now I'm realizing, no, this is such trauma, and they need people to just sit in the trauma and
mhm,
hold their hand, and they're going to go through years worth of recovery. Years. It's not a let me take you out to dinner once and then hold your hand and like, well, they'll get a new job, they'll fix it, and I'll be there for them then. No, they
mhm,
need you now.
mhm,
Now. If I just had somebody that said, man, I don't know what's going on, but I'll be here every Thursday.
mhm.
I'll be here every Thursday. We're going to dinner, and they just know, oh, I have stability in my life.
Yep,
I need that.
yep,
I need it. Just be there. You
yep,
don't even have to talk about divorce.
yep.
Just show them you did not lose this friend.
Right.
I will be here. No, yeah, you may have been the one that screwed up. You may
Mhm,
have been the one that caused your divorce.
mhm.
Or it's never 100-0.
Yeah,
It's very rarely 99-1, but let's call it 80-20.
yeah.
Even if you're the 80% fault at your divorce, God still loves that person. He's not ostracized from God. Why
Mhm,
do we ostracize them as
mhm,
Christians?
mhm.
Throw them grace. And if they're wanting to walk through, some of them are moving off to their own corner because they're living in sin still. Okay, I get that.
Yep.
But if somebody has a repentant heart and they're like, I'm just trying to get to the day, show them grace and mercy.
Mm,
God shows us grace and mercy. Aren't we supposed to be reflecting that on
mhm.
others? Reflect it on your friends who are in a tough place.
Yeah.
That's a long answer. Sorry about that. But
No,
I'm
it's good.
passionate about it
Well,
because it matters.
yeah, it reminds me of a previous episode we had just about sitting in the dirt with people. And that episode wasn't, specifically aimed towards people who are in divorce, but it was for
Mm,
anybody that's in pain. Like you don't have to come up with the right answers, the right Bible verses, the right
mm,
problem solving. Like you just need to be able to sit in the dirt and cry with people or give them your shoulder or just like sometimes it's not, we have to cry and talk about it all the time, but sometimes it's like we need to shoot pool or sometimes it's like we need to make pizza, like
correct.
it's one
Yeah,
of
it's that consistency. I lost a lot of friends, a lot. And it's not because anybody's mad at anybody or anybody's trying to teach anybody a lesson. Your life is so disrupted.
Mhm,
Your schedules are off. Um, maybe if you have kids, your visitation is off, and you lose tons of friends. I mean, I would say I'm shocked if I ever hear somebody say they didn't, because
yeah.
I'm at 90 something percent of everybody I talk to, it was catastrophic. And
Mhm.
so the couple that stay, you know, you know who they are.
Yeah.
And when they really care about you enough to say, yeah, I like you warts and all,
Mhm,
and I'm here for you. And you're right. We don't, it's not, you don't need me as your counselor.
mhm.
Sometimes you do. We're friends. Friends hold different roles, different hats. But the friend who shows up, stays by you when you're down, oh, they're
Yeah.
gold.
Yeah.
The Bible tells us that.
Yeah. My husband and I lead a small group for families on Sunday evenings. And, a lot of what you get in the church is the two-parent families with a whole gaggle of kids because, we're, be fruitful and multiply kind of people. And so
Uh-huh.
our house is usually overrun. But over the last couple of years, what we've found is that there are Christian parents in our church who want to be part of a group who want to talk about parenting things, who want to be around sane adults when they've been with kids all day, and they want to bring their kids over. And these are divorced people who are having to navigate the church culture around, all of the groups are either for men, women, or couples.
Yeah.
And so we said, you know what? We're a families group. You have a family still. You're a divorced dad or a divorced mom with a bunch of kids, and that counts. You get to be part of it, you
Yeah.
know?
Well, first of all, kudos to you for having that lens on. That's a great lens that a lot of people don't have. I would even say it's tough, especially if you're co-parenting. There are times where you don't have the kids and then
Right.
you're alone. And that's when we normally isolate because we're like, well, I don't fit in. Even as a family, yeah, I'm a family. every other Saturday. I'm a family every other week.
Yeah.
And so it's really tough on them. And then with me, I was divorced right near, COVID plus empty nesting. So I
Mm.
went from a family of five in a very busy house to literally quiet.
Yeah.
And I would go to church and, they would say, all right, we're having our Christmas party. It's $40 a couple, and we want everybody to bring one blah blah blah. And
Hmm.
then I'm sitting there thinking, is it 20 for me? Do I
Yeah.
bring half a dish?
Yeah.
Like no one even considered
Yeah.
outside. Everybody's a family, everybody's a couple, and
Yeah.
it's going to be $10 for childcare. Everybody bring that. I'm like, I'm not bringing a kid. Like they didn't
Mhm.
even fathom that somebody did not fit in their stereotypical.
Yeah.
Here's what a Christian family looks like, and it was very frustrating. I just quit going because I was
Mhm.
like, oh, no one sees me.
Yeah.
And if you don't see me, then I'll go find somebody who does.
Mhm.
And I just quit going.
Yeah.
That's not unique to me. I talked to
Yeah.
so many people who
Yeah.
would say, same thing happened to me. Here's my story.
Yeah.
Same thing happened to me.
Yeah.
Here's my story. That we don't feel seen, appreciated, or cared for
Yeah.
at most churches.
And that's like it's a learning process because like my husband and I just celebrated our 20th anniversary and we're raising kids in that kind of like that middle stage where,
Mhm,
and so it's not neither of us have divorce in our families,
mhm,
so we don't have a lot of experience, but being open to having this ministry experience at church has taught us so much of like you're my buddy even if your kids are not with you. This isn't your custodial weekend. Like you're
mhm.
still my buddy and you're still part of this group and we want you here.
Yeah.
We want to
Well,
pray with you.
yeah, it's intentional. You're being intentional about your neighbor. And, we're supposed to love our neighbor and know them, right? And so you have to be attentive, like, oh, not some people are widowed, some people are divorced, some people never got married. And instead of treating them like, well, y'all are the oddballs or you're broken,
Yeah.
it, I'm going to go down a little bit of a rabbit trail, but I think part of the reason we as Christians have this problem is because we have a higher theological problem. Is American Christianity, um, it's I'm gonna say sort of broken. You're either broken or you're not. So it's broken. We're not perfect, right? But one of our things is we just create this building program, head pastor. We
Hmm.
all sit in rows.
Hmm.
It's a system that we inherited. We think it's all normal, but it's not.
Hmm.
And we have this an idea of sort of what church and people are supposed to look like, and families. Like the Bible did tell us to be fruitful and multiply. It did.
Hmm.
But the Bible, 99% of the Bible is written to both genders, men and women. There's
Hmm.
very few verses like, okay, children, obey your parents.
Hmm.
All right, husbands, here's a verse or two. All
Yeah.
right, wives, here's a verse or two. But the rest is written to all of us. But
Hmm.
our churches, we're notorious for, we're going to have a women's ministry. We're going to
Hmm.
talk about stuff you guys can't hear. I'm like, wow, really? You only have a couple of verses that are different than all of ours. Like, do
Hmm.
y'all talk about loving your neighbors? We do too. Do you
Hmm.
talk about widows and orphans? We do too. You talk
Hmm.
about love? We do too. But they were like, oh, we have a teen ministry and a college age ministry and a why? The Bible, God's telling us all the same story. And we what it calls us to do is think, okay, husband, wife, family, we're a family push, we push family. It's like there's widows, orphans, there's so many people, there's divorcees, there's so many people that don't fit in that, and we don't know what to do with them. Well, the answer was if we're all sitting side by side loving one another, it doesn't matter.
Hmm.
It doesn't matter. Why are we labeling it? Just do the things of God well, and what he's telling you to do and what he's telling me to do, it looks the exact same. It doesn't matter if I'm divorced or
Hmm.
not. It doesn't matter if you're married and have a new toddler, or what does it matter? Your message and my message is the exact same. Our purpose is the exact same. Our kingdom work is the exact same. We have our nuances and our personality, but I don't understand why we compartmentalize so much. I think it creates a lot of problems.
Hmm.
This being
Well,
one.
I was just listening to a sermon this morning. It's Tim Keller because that's what I listen to the
I
most.
love
And
Tim. Yeah, love him.
we, we
Love
call
him.
we call him Uncle Tim in our family.
Love
And
it.
I can't talk too much because I will still cry that he died months
No.
ago. But The sermon was talking about how Christianity was the first religion that legitimized singlehood.
Hmm.
So, in the sense of, like the example was given in first century Rome, uh, Nero decreed that if you were a woman who became widowed, you had 2 years to get remarried or else,
Hmm.
because widows were seen as problems, burdens on
Yeah,
society.
burden on society. That's right.
Whereas the church came along and our command was care for widows and orphans. And so the church said, no problem, we got you. You need food, you need shelter, you need clothing. Our church community is going to take care of that for you. And if you want to go get remarried, great. But if you don't, no pressure because we got your needs met.
Right.
And he was saying the same about like the Ethiopian eunuch, for example,
Mhm.
like single has to be single,
Right.
and is now welcomed into the community of God, where before he would have been turned away from temple worship.
Right.
But with a new covenant, we have people who can be single. The past is not what matters anymore. And you can serve God in his kingdom as a single person, whether that's because you never married, because you were widowed, or because you got divorced. You know?
I so love it. I love how Christianity does that. I love how it turns the world on its head.
Yeah.
But it's so interesting because what one of the reasons I talk about dating twice in my podcast. I
Yeah.
put it way early.
Okay.
Remember I told you I have milestones and steps. I put
Yeah.
it way
Yeah.
early, not because it needs to be there, because that's what people think it needs to be. And I tell them you're not ready, and then I
Thank you.
revisit it later
Yeah. Thank you.
because they're not ready, right? But they think they are because here's the thing: when you think family, you think I'm out of relationship, so that was broken. Let me go get in one that's not broken. This
Mm.
idea that, well, I'm supposed to be married. We want to be married, right? Or we want a relationship because we are social animals in general. We all different personality types, but in general, we all want community. Well, the Bible actually is it's really interesting. It tells Adam, it's not good for you to be alone. And then Paul also is like, oh, well, it's actually really good to be single. You know why? Because if you're serving the Lord, you don't have the burden of another person
Mhm.
or kids. Like you can serve the Lord wholeheartedly. And so my podcast, even though I spend significant time telling people how to get ready to be the healthy you, I
Mhm.
also say the healthy you may or may not be in a relationship.
Mhm.
Like you can actually have incredible mission living that you could have never had
Mhm.
as a married person.
Yeah.
And so consider it. And then by the way, when you're your healthiest, you attract your healthiest.
Yeah. Healthy
So
people.
just get healthy and then you may not it's not the end zone is for you to be in another relationship. Your end zone is to draw yourself close to God, bat your best, swing for the fence your best
Mhm.
and go live a great life. Like I got to be honest with you, none of my life's perfect, but I'm telling you, I wake up in the morning and I don't really have any other burden other than who I'm going to serve because my ministry is my job. So
Mhm.
it's sort of I get it best of both worlds. It's not like I sell cars and then
Yeah.
on the side I go do ministry. My ministry is my job, but I get to wake up and I can travel anywhere. If somebody wants to have a long lunch, I can have a long lunch with them. I can
Mhm.
make like I'm going to Vegas in a couple of days on a whim because a buddy of mine needs a partner, and so I say yes. But it's like the reason I call my podcast Unyoked is that idea that you're not yoked anymore.
Mhm.
What now? What can you do
Yeah.
better for kingdom work
Mhm.
because you're unyoked? It's I thought through that a lot, and I don't think people get where I'm going yet because I'm still building the message. But my message is that don't just assume you're supposed to get back into your church with a different person sitting next to you and
Mm.
call that check. I
Yeah.
was
Well,
divorced
I
and now
would
you can
also
fix it.
say, don't hear in what you're saying that, okay, if you get divorced, now you have to be a missionary, or now you have
Right.
to be in like vocational ministry or something like that. Or since you're single, you can watch the kids on Friday nights while the marriage ministry has like, that's not what we're saying.
Right.
Right.
100%. 100%. Yeah, yeah. Great point. I guess my thing is is I was telling somebody this the other day, and sometimes we all justify, like, I think it's bad Christianese to tell somebody the Lord has something better for you, because once again, you can't speak for God. I could have cancer tomorrow, right? There's no one can promise me my tomorrow is better than today. Only God can.
Your eternity is, but
My
no.
eternity, but we're still in a broken world, and broken things happen, and no one can speak
Mhm.
for God in that. Hold on, now I've already lost my thought because I went off so far off the rabbit trail. Um, but the idea that, okay, I know what it was. You were saying that what we do with our time as single people, um, it can be missional living. I just my thing is, I believe that I would never, I think never is a strong word. I can't fathom how I would ever got to the place I am now if I wasn't single.
Mm,
Because I was and not that marriage is a rut. I was in a rut because I was happy. I was like, I'm happy. There's my wife, those are my kids, and I'm living life and everything's great. It's not until it all comes crashing down that you have to do a lot of self-reflecting. I'm forced into it, where before I would have never journeyed into it.
yeah.
And I looked at myself and I'm like, oh, I'm broken here, I'm broken there. And then, God's sanctification process, as soon as you get clear, he's like, okay, now you got that. I got 10 more things to show you,
Got
but
something else.
I'm going to be gentle. We're doing them one at a time here, two or three at a time. But I would have never walked down the road. And so to me, the journey is when you're becoming more Christ-like, that is good. And when you're walking away or not becoming more Christ-like, that is not good.
Mhm.
Where you go with that, God gave us free choice. And
Mhm.
yeah, I don't care if somebody wants to retire and go to Bahamas or they want to work twice as much at their church. That's their call. I'm not
Mhm.
here to say which one's right, but drawing yourself close to God when you have the time and the energy
Mhm.
and clear eyes, it's
Mhm.
beautiful.
Mhm.
It's beautiful. I wish I would have got here while I was married, and I might still be married.
Mm.
But I was too broken. She was too broken. And then all the mess got us. And then on this side of it, you're forced into deep counseling and deep reflections. And then good things come out of that. Good
Yeah.
things come out of soul searching.
Well, I was going to say it's not always, it doesn't have to be a divorce that brings you to that place, but I think that most of us in our Christian walk need to have a
Tragedy.
crisis, like something that propels us. And, different authors will talk about like the dark night of the soul and things like that. But we do have to have kind of that second or third or fourth come to Jesus moment where we're going to start working some things out. And it might be a disruption in your employment or your
Right.
finances, or it might be a health crisis or something going on with your kids, or, this primary relationship. But we all, we just don't get there without going deep.
Yeah. There are pain points. I think with mine, divorce was what I had a little Job moment. I mean, I had just quit my job, high profile job at a wonderful ministry. Um, Divorce, my dad strokes, died, my mom got dementia, passed away. I started a new business. My daughter was graduating. Like I had all these major life events all hit me in 18 months. In
Oh.
18 months. And then once again, then COVID kicks in and I was just alone. And so mine was like I literally crashed. It wasn't one thing, it was everything.
Mhm.
I left my church, I left my town, I lost all my friends, and that being just alone forced me to say, okay, let's wipe it all. It wasn't like one thing, it was everything.
Oh,
Everything's gone where it's you in a room with God. Like, okay, what are we doing? Like, what do you want? You
yeah.
got my attention. What do you want? And it's really funny if you don't mind. I think it's funny how God puts things together. I was reading a book. I think my counselor told me about the book. I bought it, sat on the nightstand. I promise you, it was collecting dust. I mean, I'm not even sure I broke into it. And a girl I dated for a little while, she was a brilliant, successful woman, very, very smart. We just sort of had become friends. And she goes, Todd, you are a really great communicator. And there's so many things I like about you, but you know what? You have a glass wall. And I thought,
Mm.
huh, a wall's one thing, a glass wall's another. Like she was very intentional with her words. I went home and chewed on it, and something made me open that book. And in the forward of the book, it was talking about chapter 7 or one of the chapters to explain how the book was going to work. And the person they read was me. It was me to a
Mm,
T. And it talked about
mhm.
this glass wall. And then I thought, oh no. And I ran and called my counselor, like, oh, well, I got to set up. And what it did is we took some tests. And then the test revealed this little what makes somebody have a glass wall? What is a glass wall? And and it took me down a 6 month deep dive into my personality, my all anyway, the reason I'm telling you this, not talking about me, but to say everybody, I think, has issues and we just live with them and we cover them up. And sometimes we don't ask why they're there and what it is. We just go create the life we
Yep.
want and we have defense mechanisms to cover up our problems. And when you go through something major like a divorce, so I'm answering your question you asked almost the very beginning, what can I do as a friend? Well, one of the things is realize that this isn't moving out of a house. It's not just, oh, you need to go find a job. I mean, it's a moment for someone to really do some deep work. And if you see somebody numbing, which is a very popular thing to do,
Mm-hmm.
or jumping into a relationship as fast as they can because they're codependent or whatever, beg them in the nicest way in the power of Jesus to
Mm.
go get counseling.
Yeah.
Do the deep dive. I tell everybody to get counseling. Everybody I talk to. If you're not in counseling, get in it. And
Yep.
don't you dare date till you do, because
Mhm.
why would you do that to somebody?
Mhm.
You don't even know who you are. You're not trying to get back to the person that was unmarried, single.
Right.
You're
You're
trying
not,
to get something.
that
You're
person
trying to get
doesn't
something different.
exist anymore.
That
Right.
person's dead, gone. And then you've been married for whether it's 4 years, 20 years. You know, mine was 19. I didn't even know who I was before I was married, and I didn't
Right.
know who I was coming out of it.
Yeah.
There's so much work to do. So I have so much appreciation for counseling. I
Mhm.
didn't before. I mean, I got into counseling as a struggling husband, and
Mm.
then when the marriage just did not last, I was like, this is the best thing ever. I'm staying in this till I die, as far as I know, because it's like sanctification. You'll never get, how do you ever get to the point where, like, this is good enough?
Yeah.
God didn't
Well,
want to
yeah,
sit
I think
there.
I told you this when we were talking earlier that for the most part, yeah, counseling these days is a female-dominated profession.
Mhm.
More counselors are female than male, and more clients are female than male. And
Right.
so this happens across the board. I'm more likely to see more women in my
Yeah.
practice than I am men.
Yeah.
Where that stops is when men are facing divorce or have gone through divorce, they suddenly have this realization, and maybe it takes, a good friend telling them, buddy, you got to get into counseling. Um, or maybe it's just that desperation. They know that they need something. It doesn't feel right on the inside. Everything has been turned upside down. But I
Mhm.
see men in my practice who are going through divorce.
Yeah.
And these are
Makes
men that
sense.
have maybe they never got to cry in front of their wives, but they cry
Mhm.
in front of me.
Right. Yeah. I agree I affirm everything you're saying from my knowledge, but of course you would know more than I would. But I'm going to give you another one that I think is a reason.
Okay.
Women try, but well, men don't.
Right.
So women who aren't coming to you,
Mhm.
they're at least getting wine night out with their friends. They're at
Right.
least having somebody sleep over or they're going on vacation together.
Mhm.
Men are islands.
Mhm.
And so if they don't come to you, where are they going to get it?
They're
Once
not.
again, they go to church. It's like, hey, buddy, come help us fold chairs. Well, how's that helping me? And so it's like
Yeah.
the men that know they need help, they need you.
Mhm.
And this is what it saddens me because with the podcast, I have an avatar in my mind that I'm talking to a 37-year-old woman that lives in Kansas who is married to a deacon. That's
Okay.
who I talk to in my
Okay.
head.
Okay.
But the truth is, when I look at my stats and my data,
Yeah.
skew more men than women
Yeah.
because men are like, well, no one else is talking to me like this. And so they actually listen to me. And because their friends are shooting the bull with, if they even have friends,
Right.
they're playing pool or going home or what, they don't go hang, sit. and cry. They just don't.
Yeah.
They should. They don't. And
I
it's
don't know.
really funny. To the left of me right here, I have in my picture frames, gold frames of all my best friends. I
Oh,
keep them in my house because
okay.
I value them.
Yeah.
They mean a lot to me. I feel like I am a rarity
Yeah.
that I have friends that I can cry with and cuss with everyone. Like six of these are bastards. They all hear me cuss.
Okay.
You know why? Because I don't, the mask is off with them.
Yeah.
I tell them real, raw, truthful sin. And
Hmm.
sometimes I call it sin, sometimes I don't. I'm just saying, this is true.
Yeah.
This is true. And if you don't have one of those people,
Hmm.
you're in deep trouble. And
Yep.
so that's the other thing I tell all the people that list, all my divorce friends, get a counselor and tell them the truth. Because if
Yeah.
you're going to lie to them, why go?
Yep. Yeah.
Go and just admit it. You're flawed. It's okay. They're flawed too. We're all flawed. Call it like it is. Which
Yeah.
goes back to the church thing. We're so it's so big for us to the Bible's all about truth and grace, right? This tension between truth and grace. We skew more to one or the other as people, and we skew more to other as churches,
Right.
right? Liberal churches are like love everybody, and then the other church like truth, 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 truth.
Hmm.
And the Bible says Jesus was full of truth,
Yeah.
full of grace.
Yeah.
Both. We're not. And so what happens when you go to a conservative Christian church? It's like, well, God said divorce is bad. Like, what do you expect us to do? We just got to say it.
Hmm.
And and so I think I think it's the problem's worse in conservative churches because when you go through tragedy and you need some mercy,
Hmm.
that's where you don't get them.
Yep.
And if you go to the ones that are full of mercy,
Hmm.
sometimes you're allowed to slip into sin because they're like, well, we're not going to tell you the truth.
Yeah.
And it's sad.
Well, yeah, and just going to bring that back like I do on most of my podcast episodes that like you need counseling. We've already discussed that. And it's really important to find a Christian counselor. If you are a Christian, like you need somebody who's going to be able to get raw with you and hear all the icky stuff that you're going to pull out and who's going to use their clinical discernment not to say, well, let me slap a Bible verse on that, but also who is informed by those very Bible verses in the way that they help you find truth. So it's
Pull you
really,
back to truth and have
yeah,
here's a biblical lens
yeah,
to put on that
yeah.
the textbook might have not told you,
Hmm.
but as your sister or brother in Christ, I am going to tell you.
Yeah,
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 that's great. You're 100% right. I do give that distinction because unfortunately, I've had some people come to me like, well, whatever my HMO or whatever does, I'm like, I don't care if
mm,
you got to pay out of pocket, find a Christian one. It'll
yeah,
make all the difference in the world.
yeah,
And I also say, find one who's you um, really gel with.
yeah.
I've been some that I just was like, I would not be this person's friend outside
No,
of this room, so we're not going to get
yeah,
along.
yeah,
And then what I like one that cusses back because then I know I'm getting the real them too.
yeah,
I
yeah.
know I use the word cussing too much, but it's almost an
I
analogy
do
to
it.
it.
I do it. It's a part of mirroring. It's like if you're, I'm not going to say it on the podcast because I don't want to put the E on
Yeah,
my
right.
little podcast marking. But if you're going to say the S word or the F word or whatever word
Yeah,
it is in the session, and that's where you're at, I'm going to mirror that back to you because that's where you're at. And we're
right.
going to move you to a new place, but that's where you're at right now.
That's
So,
right. Yeah, and being real and raw. Like sometimes you get the cussing comes out of anger.
mhm,
Sometimes it just comes out of flowery language. Like cuss
mhm.
words, you say cuss words actually are part of intelligence because it's a vocabulary. My brother-in-law is a comedian, and he tells this one joke on purpose. He's a clean comedian, but he tells this joke in private, and he puts a cuss word in one and not the other, and it works with the cuss word. It doesn't work without it. It's like
Yeah,
it's
yeah,
language,
yeah,
Like once again, this is back to the Christianese I don't like of like, well, here's the rule. Like it says, don't let anything unwholesome come out of your mouth while we're all doing all this unwholesome stuff out of our
yeah.
mouth. So crazy. I don't know how we
Okay.
got out of cussing, but
Well, yeah, we could have a whole other discussion about that, but let me bring you back to Well, you and I had talked a little bit about doing a little bit more collaboration on your podcast as well. And so we'll be
Yep.
talking about that, and I'll provide links for people too when that stuff is ready. So this is a discussion that you need to hear more of. You like Todd's voice on this. I encourage you to find the Unyoked podcast as well as the materials. Do you want to mention the name of the book and workbook?
Yeah, so when I did the podcast, the first book I wrote was really in my first three episodes, and it is, are you considering a divorce? Are you going through one? Or did you just get out of one? So I sort of called there's recovery and then there's the storm. And
Hmm.
this is the storm. It's called Unyoked Choices. It's on Amazon. And it's just, the book When You're Pregnant, What to Expect When You're
Yeah.
Expecting. That was my plan, is to make, anytime somebody goes through a divorce, here's the book. But I realized it would have been a long book, so I cut it up. The first one is the storm. What do you do? How do you make a good decision about a divorce as a Christian?
Hmm.
Not the rules. I probably don't throw hardly any Bible verses in there at all. It's
Hmm.
principles. It's
Okay.
more just principles, like fight for your marriage, and here's why, and here's a great line in the sand. And if you're going to try to salvage it, here's some good advice. And
Hmm.
then you're going through one. Well, here's some things you don't want to go do, and here's some things I encourage you to go do. It's just very helpful to keep in the purse. The second book I just did is a women's workbook, and it's for, you already are divorced, and it's that recovery process. And
Hmm.
I know people who read it immediately after 1 month, 6 months, 2 years, because that's the thing that I'm coming to realize. I'm in my fifth year of being single.
Hmm.
I'd still call myself in divorce recovery
Yeah.
because I'm still learning about me. I still wake up sometimes sad
Mm.
of like, yeah, this is not what I wanted in life. I fought hard for my marriage. It didn't work. Doesn't mean I want to salvage it anymore, but it doesn't mean I still don't value marriage,
Yeah.
just the concept of it. And
Yeah.
all the dreams you have of, we were going to retire, and now that I'm an empty nester, it's like all those dreams. I wake up every morning, I'm like, yeah, they didn't come to fruition, and I have to live with that. So
Hmm.
I still deal with that. And so this is more built for women of, I got, the forward is written by a woman. I had nothing but women help me with my edits and my proofing or whatever. So even though I'm a guy, I just believe that the people who like listening to me on the podcast, they trust me that I put in the work with it. I got women to help, but I did bend it to women, and I may do the same for men. I've been asked now, do men? I thought, once again, I thought women were my avatar, so I may do that. But unyoked, that one's an unyoked divorce workbook. So I'm keeping the theme unyoked. So if you type unyoke into Amazon, believe it or not, like, I'm number one and two. It's a
Nice.
phrase nobody's using yet. So shh,
Okay.
don't tell anybody.
No, we're telling everybody here.
Oh yeah, that's right. Yeah, we want y'all to go.
Okay, that's great. So I'm going to have links for you guys in the show notes, and you can find out what Todd's doing. You have toddturner.com as well, right?
That's right. It's my business, and it's the divorce part. I just put it all under one roof. You can
Yep.
find divorce. There will be links there. I have resources, links to the episodes.
Yep.
Yeah, but it's all, Amazon and, Spotify, all the things. I actually have a YouTube channel. I record most of my stuff with video. So if you like watching instead of listening, you can go
Hmm.
to YouTube, type in Unyoked. Good luck finding it there. Not as easy as Amazon, but it's there somewhere.
Okay, got it. We'll have those links. And so, Todd, I'm going to ask you the question I always wrap up interviews with. What are you doing for soul care?
Yeah, interesting. You know, I've I grew up my whole life in private school and church. We were Sunday morning, Sunday night, Wednesday.
Yep.
We were church people
Hmm.
back in the South, right? That's
Hmm.
like, we were church people, and then private school. And so I grew up with church. I grew up with Bible study, Bible memorization, Bible reading. I worked for an international ministry. Like, I've been in the bubble. I find that my peace is coming not from the things anymore and the rituals and the routines.
Yeah.
They're coming in the quietness.
Mm.
And I know some Christians will hear this and they'll roll their eyes. So I don't want to get in debate, but I do yoga. I literally turn one in the room in my house into a yoga/meditation room now. People hear that, they hear something different. So here's what I'm saying.
Hmm.
It's me alone,
Hmm.
praying,
Hmm.
decluttering, listening, and moving my body. Sometimes still, sometimes I'm still, sometimes I'm not.
Hmm.
And my time with my friends that I am very intentional about, where I sit, and it's not us playing pool,
Hmm.
it's not us doing something together, it's doing nothing together.
Yeah.
And it brings me peace, it centers me from chaos. And I leave the room, I leave my meetings just feeling so good. Like I just feel really good.
Yeah.
And then I will go back to the Bible. I will go back to the Bible because that's where we all should go, God's word. But I'm reading the Bible differently than I ever have.
Mm.
I read it as a theologian for most of my life because I was taught. Here's how
Yeah.
you read the Bible, and here's how you do interpretation. You get to the Hebrew. I'm just reading it like it's God's story,
Yeah.
and it is.
Hmm.
And he's talking to us. He's telling us this big story. So I
Hmm.
know we sometimes brag about verse by verse, and there's a right way to do it. Like, but it's God, the God of the universe, wants to tell me something, and
Yeah.
not Todd Turner, you, me. He's
Hmm.
telling us something, and I'm just sort of sitting at his feet and saying, "Yeah, you're telling me a story, and I get to sit out and listen to your story,
Hmm.
and it doesn't matter what's Bill's life, whatever. Just sit and let my soul be filled with God's eternal, perfectly given story
Mm.
about him, his character, his redemptive plan. Like it's so satisfying, right? It's just so
Good.
satisfying. Just sitting in that, I just it brings me joy, peace. It's just I love to travel. I love to do stuff, and I love that God put us on this earth. And there's so much to do here, but just sitting at His feet and listening to Him talk,
Mm.
yeah, it fills me.
One thing is needed, right?
Yeah, right,
Yeah.
right.
Hmm.
Hope that answers your question. That's a
Yeah.
long way around the bush, but
No, you gave us three really good options for soul care that you're finding really fulfilling right now. So that's great.
yeah.
I
Well,
feel
I
like
mean, I said, oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
sometime maybe you come back and talk to us about men having friendships. That would be really helpful.
I'd love to. I got a lot to say on it. And I
Okay.
want to go back to the yoga thing. I said something about yoga the other day. On the reason I know it's a problem is Christians love to fight about stuff,
Hmm.
and saw a big fight about it. So I'm just being cautious. There are people who hear it and they think it's the devil's work, but I would
Yeah.
just say call it stretching. Call it whatever you
Yeah.
need.
Yeah.
But I use the term yoga, and it maybe not be the technical term. It's just sitting,
Mm-hmm.
being intentional, and taking care of our
I,
body.
I've
It's our
started
temple.
I've started favoring the term mat work because
Okay.
you're on the mat, you're stretching your body. There is that sensitivity. Way back in the early part of my podcast, we had an episode about yoga therapy or
Okay.
like a therapeutic yoga where it's trauma informed and the person is trained to help you process things somatically through your body.
Okay.
So that and she's a Christian practitioner and all of that. Like there are Christian people who do stretching and poses, and
Amen.
it really comes back to your heart's posture of whether you're worshiping God or some other unknown deity.
That's a
And
100% right. I agree. And it takes all those semantics to get people to understand. We're not talking about whatever it is
right,
you think we're
we're not
talking about.
chanting, we're not.
Yeah. Yeah.
I
Not
mean,
worshiping somebody.
my listeners know I'm trained with Revelation Wellness as a group fitness instructor, and the terminology that we use in Revelation Wellness is just called Rev on the mat. So
Okay.
it's one foot is staying on the ground at all the time. Like it's gentle, it's
Mhm.
slower. We're not bopping around like some of the other movement that we do. And our founder, Lisa Keaton, will say this: like if the poses themselves were sinful you could not bend down to tie your shoe because that would be a forward fold.
Right. Well, thank
Okay.
you so much for having me. I really appreciate it. And I appreciate you having a sense of spirit to divorcees. And I want to say divorcees are not just people going through a divorce. Divorcees, it's a
Yep.
lifetime. And even
Mhm.
people who are married
Remarried.
are remarried. Yeah, they're still divorcees
Mm-hmm.
and the kids of divorcees. I have friends, some of my best friends over here are divorced kids. They're 50, 60-year old and they still feel like they're from a divorced family. It is a lifetime
Yeah.
pain
Mm-hmm.
and it doesn't go away in a couple of months.
Right.
So be sensitive to that, in your churches and in your friendships, because there's people walking around with some big scars. They may fake it well, but they're there.
Yeah. Well, and what I meant to say earlier too is that on this podcast, we talk a lot about mental health. And it's true that as a therapist, I work with a lot of people with depression, anxiety, bipolar, ADHD, things like that are legitimate mental health diagnoses. But as a licensed marriage and family therapist, my scope of practice really is relationships. And
Mhm.
I have more training in relationships than other types of therapists. And so, one of the biggest factors that brings people into counseling, especially to see an MFT, is because they're struggling in some kind of relationship, and that may be causing depression or anxiety,
Yeah.
but relational issues are at the core. And so even though my title says marriage and family therapist, it's really covering that whole human experience where we either came out of a marriage or we came out of a divorce or unmarried parents, and then we moved our way into relationships and those were either successful or not. And so it really defines, the lifespan. So
I love talking to professionals, know what you're talking about. You have words and concepts for things that are abstract for me,
yeah.
and you've already nailed them down. It's just so great to talk to somebody who knows what you're doing, which is why you're an expert. You know where to touch, and what order to ask, and know we can be friends. We can be really good friends to people in need.
Yeah.
Therapists are trained to ask the right correct questions at the right time and not move on too fast. And that's something that lay people don't have yet. And it's something that the people in our small groups don't get, which is why divorced people don't do well in traditional churches, because they're not going to get what they need
Yeah.
from the pews and even sometimes the circles.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, Todd, we better wrap up. We could go
Better
all
wrap
day,
up.
right? Okay. Well, thank you so much for being here. I'll have all the links for everybody in the show notes, and make sure you also check out the Unyoked podcast wherever you get podcasts. The Soul Grit podcast is a production of Soul Grit Resources. You can find more at soulgritresources.com or on the socials at Soul Grit Resources. You can email me at info@soulgritresources.com.